The Amazon River moves so much water that when it reaches the Atlantic Ocean, it pushes the sea itself backward. For hundreds of kilometers offshore, you can still scoop fresh water from the surface. In some places, the river is so wide that the opposite bank disappears beyond the horizon. You are standing beside a river and cannot see the other side, and yet nobody has ever truly seen its bottom. Not clearly, not directly, not with cameras, submarines, or any machine we have built so far. Visibility in much of the Amazon is measured in centimeters. The water is so thick with sediment and decomposing plant material that light simply stops existing below the surface. Sonar struggles, maps fail, entire sections of the riverbed shift and disappear between flood seasons. Scientists have mapped more of Mars than the bottom of the Amazon River. There is also a second river beneath it, 4 kilometers underground, wider than the Amazon in some sections, flowing silently through buried rock, discovered almost by accident in 2011, and the things moving through the darkness above it are no less strange. Electric eels generating 860 volts, catfish migrating thousands of kilometers through water they cannot see through, sharks swimming deeper inland than any shark species on Earth should be able to travel. The harder scientists push into the Amazon, the more the river seems to resist being understood. Tonight, we descend into the largest river system on Earth and into the strange reality that one of the most accessible places on this planet may also be one of the least explorable. But before we start, let me know in the comments if you have any topic suggestions you would like me to cover in future videos. Now, let's go beneath the surface of a river that still refuses to fully reveal what it's hiding. Long before the Amazon became a river, this part of South America lay beneath a quiet inland sea. Warm salt water covered the basin for millions of years, drifting slowly beneath ancient skies, while marine organisms settled into soft sediment below. Shells accumulated where forests would one day stand. Fish adapted to brackish water moved through drowned valleys that no longer exist. Even now, traces of that vanished sea remain hidden inside the basin's biology. Freshwater stingrays descended from marine ancestors still move through the river system, carrying the memory of an ocean that once occupied the continent's center. The transformation began deep beneath the western horizon. Around 15 million years ago, tectonic pressure slowly forced the Andes Mountains upward. The rise was gradual, almost imperceptible on human timescales, yet its consequences reshaped half a continent. Before the Andes existed, the basin drained westward into the Pacific Ocean. Rivers flowed toward the setting sun across low plains that no longer survive in their original form. As the mountains rose higher, they blocked that movement entirely. Water backed up across the interior, collecting in enormous wetlands and shallow lakes before gravity eventually forced a reversal. The flow turned eastward toward the Atlantic, establishing the direction the Amazon still follows today. What emerged afterward was not a normal river. It became something far larger and more diffused, a hydrological organism spread across nearly 7 million square kilometers. From orbit, the basin resembles a vascular network branching through rainforest and floodplain, carrying rainfall from thousands of distant points into one immense circulation system. More than 1,100 tributaries feed the Amazon. 17 of them extend for over 1,500 kilometers, long enough to qualify as major rivers on their own. Some begin high in glacial meltwater beneath Andean peaks. Others gather quietly inside flat tropical forest, where rainfall pools into blackwater creeks hidden beneath dense canopy. Rain falls here with astonishing consistency. Across much of the watershed, Annual precipitation reaches between 2,000 and 3,000 millimeters. Moisture arriving from the Atlantic drifts westward over the forest, condenses into clouds, and falls back into the basin in an endless atmospheric cycle. Trees themselves participate in the process, releasing water vapor through billions of leaves and feeding the formation of more rain farther inland. The basin does not simply receive weather, it helps generate it. Scale alters every familiar assumption. In smaller rivers, a source can be identified cleanly, a channel traced clearly from beginning to end. The Amazon resists that simplicity. There is no single spring or mountain stream that adequately explains its existence. Its identity emerges from accumulation, from thousands of waterways merging across distances so large they begin to lose ordinary geographic meaning. This is the foundation beneath every difficulty that follows. The Amazon is often spoken of as though it were one river moving through one landscape. In reality, it behaves more like a continent made liquid, gathering mountains, rainfall, forests, sediment, chemistry, and time into a single moving system that only briefly resembles the idea of a river at all. A glass of water taken from certain Amazon tributaries can look almost like brewed tea held beneath weak light. The color comes not from soil alone, but from forests dissolving slowly into the current. Leaves fall into flooded channels and begin to decay beneath tropical heat, releasing tannins and humic acids into the water. These compounds drift outward through entire river systems, staining them dark brown or nearly black. Along the Rio Negro and other blackwater tributaries, the surface can appear smooth and reflective from above, yet only a few centimeters below it, the world vanishes completely. Sunlight enters the river briefly, then disappears. In clear ocean water, light may travel 200 meters downward before darkness fully takes hold. In much of the Amazon, illumination fades within less than 10 centimeters. The surface film becomes a boundary between two separate environments, one exposed to the sky and another sealed beneath suspended particles and dissolved organic matter. Below that thin layer, photosynthesis almost entirely ceases. Aquatic plants become scarce, and many organisms survive through sensory systems that do not rely on vision at all. Even the so-called whitewater rivers remain opaque. Their pale brown appearance comes from sediment carried eastward from the Andes, where rainfall and erosion grind mountain rock into fine suspended material. Each year, the Amazon transports roughly 1.2 billion tons of this sediment through the basin. Clay, silt, and microscopic mineral fragments remain suspended in constant motion, turning the water column into something closer to liquid earth than open water. Scientists describe this condition with the term turbidity. In ordinary rivers, turbidity may fluctuate after storms or seasonal runoff. In the Amazon, it defines the environment itself. Cameras lowered beneath the surface encounter only a dense brown field illuminated by their own lights. Lasers scatter uselessly through the suspended particles. Optical sonar systems designed for precision imaging lose coherence almost immediately. Light does not travel here in straight paths. It fractures, diffuses, and disappears into the moving sediment. Human divers experience the river in fragments rather than scenes. Hands vanish inches from a diving mask. Orientation dissolves. Downward and sideways become difficult to distinguish once currents begin pulling through the darkness. No diver has ever conducted a sustained visual observation of the Amazon riverbed under true field conditions. The bottom exists mostly as touch, pressure, and inference. Machines fare little better. Remotely operated vehicles engineered for deep ocean exploration perform reliably in cold, stable seawater, but the Amazon overwhelms them within minutes. Fine sediment infiltrates seals and joints, grinding against motors and clogging intake systems. Sensors lose calibration beneath constant abrasion. Navigation systems struggle to interpret an environment with no stable visual reference points. Even powerful floodlights create only pale clouds of reflected debris, as though the river rejects illumination itself. The result is a strange scientific inversion. The challenge is not reaching the riverbed. Boats cross above it every day. Instruments can descend into the water without difficulty. The problem is that almost nothing remains visible once it enters. Beneath the surface lies an environment where ordinary sight ceases to function, and where the familiar relationship between observation and understanding begins quietly to unravel. Far below the surface, sound travels where light cannot. In the open ocean, this property has allowed ships to map mountain ranges, trenches, and volcanic ridges hidden beneath kilometers of water. Pulses of sound descend into darkness, strike the seafloor, and return upward carrying information about depth and shape. Sonar transformed the modern understanding of the ocean floor, revealing landscapes no human eye had ever seen directly. By all conventional reasoning, the same technology should function even more effectively in freshwater rivers. Yet the Amazon interferes with sound almost as thoroughly as it interferes with light. The difficulty begins inside the water column itself. Billions of suspended particles drift continuously through the current, mineral fragments from distant mountains mixing with organic debris carried from flooded forest and eroded banks. When sonar pulses move through this dense suspension, many never reach the bottom at all. Instead, they strike clouds of sediment hanging invisibly in midwater and reflect upward prematurely. Instruments interpret these reflections as solid surfaces, generating phantom contours that appear and vanish from one scan to the next. Engineers refer to this phenomenon as acoustic turbidity. The river becomes filled with microscopic obstacles that scatter sound waves before coherent signals can return. A sonar beam entering the Amazon does not travel cleanly downward through empty water. It disperses through shifting layers of suspended matter, fragmenting into echoes that overlap and interfere with one another until the true riverbed becomes difficult to isolate from the noise surrounding it. Seasonal flooding complicates the problem further. During high water months, certain sections of the basin expand outward to widths approaching 50 kilometers. The river loses any stable geometric form and spreads across floodplains in braided channels and submerged forest corridors. Conducting systematic sonar sweeps across spaces this vast requires fleets of vessels moving continuously for months, while water levels, currents, and sediment conditions change beneath them in real time. Even when sonar successfully reaches the bottom, the riverbed itself resists interpretation. Unlike rocky ocean floors that reflect sound clearly, much of the Amazon floor consists of loose sand, fine silt, and decaying organic material. These surfaces absorb acoustic energy rather than returning it sharply. Sonar pulses fade into soft sediment layers and return weakly distorted, as though the river were muffling attempts to measure it. Multi-beam sonar systems, among the most sophisticated mapping tools ever developed, have managed to produce only partial coverage of the main channel. Fewer than 15% of the Amazon's central course has been mapped with any meaningful resolution. Large sections remain represented only by scattered transects and incomplete depth profiles collected under changing seasonal conditions. Yet within those fragments, an unfamiliar landscape has emerged. Beneath the opaque water lie steep escarpments descending into darkness, submerged canyon systems carved by ancient flow patterns, and depressions exceeding 90 meters in depth. Some appeared only in 21st century surveys, hidden for centuries beneath ordinary river traffic, moving unknowingly overhead. The Amazon riverbed is not a smooth channel carrying water quietly toward the sea. It is a buried terrain with contours as complex as dry land, concealed beneath conditions that continuously distort every attempt to observe it. Sound reaches farther here than sight ever could, but even sound arrives fragmented, scattered, and incomplete, drifting back upward through the current like a language only partially understood. For centuries, maps portrayed the Amazon as an immense but fundamentally simple river, broad, shallow, and diffuse across the lowlands of northern South America. Early navigators described vast expanses of brown water spreading across flat terrain, a river that seemed to move outward more than downward. The basin appeared too wide and too geologically gentle to conceal significant depth. Even many scientists assumed the main channel resembled an enlarged floodplain, deep in places perhaps, but not dramatically so. That assumption endured until systematic depth surveys began during the 1970s. Research vessels crossing certain sections of the main channel recorded sonar returns that seemed initially impossible. Instruments indicated depths exceeding 90 meters, values so unexpected that crews recalibrated equipment repeatedly before accepting the measurements as genuine. In some places, the riverbed descended farther below the surface than Niagara Falls rises above it. Beneath the broad equatorial current existed vertical spaces large enough to contain submerged landscapes hidden entirely from ordinary perception. The deepest confirmed region lies near Obidos, a town positioned along one of the strangest transitions in the river's course. Upstream, the Amazon spreads widely across the basin, dispersing through multiple channels and immense floodplains. At Obidos, ancient geological formations constrict that movement abruptly. The river narrows to approximately 1.8 kilometers across, forcing the full discharge of the Amazon through a single confined passage. The scale of that discharge resists ordinary comparison. Roughly 209,000 cubic meters of water move through the bottleneck every second, pressing eastward with extraordinary force. Near the surface, the river appears deceptively calm in certain seasons, but deeper currents accelerate through the constriction with immense momentum. Water descending into the channel encounters pressure gradients, turbulence, and suspended sediment moving together in continuous compression. Conditions below 40 meters become increasingly hostile to exploration. Pressure alone would remain manageable by deep ocean standards, yet pressure is only one element of the environment. The current pushes laterally with enough force to destabilize heavy equipment. Fine abrasive sediment infiltrates mechanical systems under constant flow. Orientation disappears entirely within the opaque water column. Instruments attempting to hover or descend steadily encounter shifting hydraulic forces impossible to predict precisely from the surface. Conventional submersibles designed for marine research perform poorly under such conditions. Ocean vehicles operate most effectively in comparatively stable water where visibility, despite darkness at depth, remains sufficient for navigation and imaging systems. The Amazon offers no such stability. A submersible entering these deep channel sections would need to withstand pressure while maintaining exact positional control inside fast moving sediment laden currents without relying on visual guidance of any kind. As a result, the deepest parts of the river remain unobserved directly. No diver has descended there and returned with visual documentation. No crewed vehicle has rested on the bottom. Everything known about these submerged depths emerges indirectly through acoustic surveys, pressure measurements, and current modeling assembled piece by piece from the surface above. And within those fragments, the shape of the river changes again. The Amazon ceases to resemble the sprawling lowland waterway visible from satellites and shorelines. Deep beneath the opaque current, the channel contracts into something narrower, steeper, and more severe, a hidden architecture carved beneath one of the busiest rivers on Earth, existing continuously below passing boats, storms, floating forests, and centuries of human movement overhead. On many ocean floors, geological change unfolds slowly enough that maps remain reliable for generations. A submarine canyon surveyed decades ago will still occupy roughly the same position today. The Amazon does not permit that kind of permanence. Beneath its surface, the riverbed is in constant motion, reshaped hour by hour by the force of moving water, carrying entire landscapes, downstream grain by grain. Along the bottom of the channel, immense quantities of sand, gravel, and coarse sediment slide continuously eastward in a process known as bedload transport. Unlike suspended particles drifting invisibly through the water column, this heavier material remains in contact with the riverbed itself. Currents push it forward in rolling pulses, lifting grains briefly before dropping them again farther downstream. Across the full scale of the basin, millions of tons of sediment migrate this way every day, quietly rearranging the structure of the channel beneath the opaque current. The riverbed does not remain fixed long enough to become familiar. Ridges rise, collapse, and reform in new positions as sediment accumulates unevenly across the floor. Channels deepen temporarily before filling again with shifting deposits. Certain sections behave less like stable terrain and more like moving weather systems made from sand. During the annual flood season, this movement intensifies dramatically. Water levels rise between 10 and 15 meters in many parts of the basin, increasing hydraulic pressure throughout the channel network. Tributaries swell simultaneously across enormous distances, feeding additional momentum into the main river. Currents accelerate, banks erode, and entire sections of the river begin adjusting to the increased volume passing through them. At depth, enormous underwater dunes migrate along the bottom. Some rise nearly 10 meters tall, large enough to resemble submerged hills. Though invisible from above, they move steadily downstream under the force of the current. Instruments anchored near one position may later find the riverbed elevated several meters higher or scoured unexpectedly deeper as these sediment waves pass beneath them. A map produced one week can become partially inaccurate within days. The river itself also migrates laterally across the basin over longer timescales. In some regions, meanders shift sideways by as much as 100 meters each year. Forests, standing beside the channel, gradually collapse into the water as outer banks erode, while new land accumulates elsewhere through fresh deposition. Villages, islands, and tributary mouths slowly change relative position as the river redraws its own boundaries decade after decade. For scientists attempting long-term observation, this creates severe practical difficulties. Permanent cables laid across the riverbed become buried, exposed, or severed by migrating sediment. Anchored sensors disappear beneath shifting deposits or are swept away entirely. Monitoring equipment designed for stable environments cannot maintain calibration where the physical landscape itself refuses to remain still. Yet, this instability is also what makes the Amazon scientifically extraordinary. The basin functions as one of the most dynamic sedimentary systems on Earth, continuously transferring material across continental distances while reshaping itself in real time. Its currents record rainfall, erosion, tectonic history, and seasonal climate variation simultaneously through motion alone. The paradox settles quietly beneath every measurement collected there. The river is fascinating precisely because it never stops changing. But that same continuous transformation prevents the kind of fixed observation on which modern mapping depends. The Amazon cannot be captured easily because the thing being measured refuses to hold still long enough to become fully known. At night, along certain stretches of the basin, the surface sometimes breaks with slow circular ripples, followed by a brief inhalation of air before the water closes again. The animal responsible may weigh 200 kilograms and measure 3 meters long, yet vanish almost immediately beneath the opaque current. This is the arapaima, among the largest freshwater fish on Earth, an ancient species armored in heavy scales and dependent on atmospheric oxygen for survival. Every several minutes, it must rise to breathe, exposing itself briefly between long intervals spent below. Even with this predictable behavior, much of its life remains poorly understood, especially in deeper sections of the river where direct observation becomes impossible. The Amazon basin contains approximately 3,000 known species of freshwater fish, more than inhabit the entire Atlantic Ocean. And still, biologists believe the inventory remains incomplete by an extraordinary margin. Estimates suggest that between 20 and 40% of Amazonian fish species have yet to be formally described, many of them occupying black water tributaries, submerged forest corridors, and deep channel habitats rarely sampled by researchers. In clearer rivers, sight dominates survival. Here, other senses govern movement instead. Electric eels generate fields powerful enough to release discharges of up to 860 volts, sufficient to stun large animals crossing shallow water. Yet these bursts are only one part of a more subtle sensory system. Beneath the current, electric organs also emit weaker continuous pulses that function like invisible touch. Distortions in those fields allow the eel to detect nearby objects, navigate obstacles, and locate prey within complete darkness. The river, though visually opaque, remains rich with electrical information. Other predators move through the same hidden spaces. Giant river otters patrol flooded channels in coordinated family groups, hunting fish through pressure waves and rapid underwater maneuvering. Bull sharks travel astonishing distances inland, entering freshwater systems far beyond the ranges once thought possible for large marine predators. And among them moves the boto, the Amazon River dolphin, pale gray when young and gradually pinkening with age. The boto inhabits a sensory world built almost entirely from sound. Its flexible neck allows it to weave through submerged branches and flooded forest with unusual precision, while bursts of echolocation clicks pulse constantly through the water around it. Returning echoes construct a detailed acoustic image of the environment, revealing fish, roots, trunks, and channel contours hidden beyond vision. During flood season, botos have been observed navigating through forest hundreds of meters from the main channel, moving calmly between tree trunks standing beneath several meters of water. Farther below, in regions rarely sampled directly, enormous catfish continue to emerge from obscurity. Some exceed 2 meters in length and belong to lineages still being formally described by science as recently as 2018. Many spend most of their lives in deep channel habitats where nets function poorly and visual surveys are nearly impossible. Their existence becomes known through occasional captures, tissue samples, and fragments of acoustic data gathered from beneath the current. The darkness below the Amazon's surface is not an absence. It is a fully inhabited environment shaped by organisms that evolved under conditions where vision offers little advantage. Electricity, vibration, chemical traces, and sound become the primary architecture of perception there. Life continues densely through that hidden world, adapting not despite the lack of light, but because of it. Somewhere far inland, thousands of kilometers from the Atlantic coast, a shark turns slowly through freshwater darkness beneath drifting sediment and invisible current. Above it, rain falls through forest canopy onto villages, tributaries, and floodplain lakes. Boats cross the surface carrying fuel, fruit, timber, and people. Yet below them moves an animal more commonly associated with coastlines and estuaries, a predator that entered the river from the sea and continued inland farther than almost any observer once believed possible. The bull shark possesses a rare biological tolerance that separates it from nearly every other shark species on Earth. Most sharks depend on saltwater chemistry to maintain equilibrium within their bodies. Bull sharks regulate that chemistry actively through specialized kidneys and cellular processes that control salt concentration with unusual precision. This adaptation allows them to survive indefinitely in fresh water, crossing gradually from estuaries into rivers without suffering the osmotic stress that would kill most marine predators. Within the Amazon basin, bull sharks have been documented nearly 4,000 kilometers from the ocean. Their range extends so deep into the continent that early reports were often dismissed as mistakes or exaggerations. Yet, fishing records, tissue samples, and tagging studies gradually confirmed the reality of their migration. The sharks were not occasional visitors pushed inland accidentally. They were residents, moving routinely through one of the largest freshwater systems on Earth. Unlike many oceanic sharks, however, Amazon bull sharks are rarely observed near the surface. They spend much of their time in midwater and near bottom habitats within deeper sections of the main channel. In clearer marine environments, large sharks are often tracked visually from boats, aircraft, or underwater cameras. None of those approaches function reliably here. No camera system has ever captured sustained footage of a bull shark moving through deep Amazon habitat. No submersible has followed one beneath the current. Nearly everything known about their presence comes indirectly through animals, caught by fishermen, or detected through acoustic transmitters attached briefly to their bodies. Those acoustic tags have revealed strange movement patterns. Individual sharks migrate vertically through the water column each day, descending and ascending between roughly 40 and 60 meters beneath the surface. The purpose of these movements remains uncertain. They may follow prey concentrations, temperature gradients, dissolved oxygen levels, or subtle hydraulic structures within the channel itself. The river conceals the behavior almost completely, leaving only fragments of data drifting back to researchers through electronic signals. Even the total population remains unknown. Scientists have no reliable method for counting large predators distributed across 7 million square kilometers of turbid water and flooded forest. Traditional survey methods fail in environments where visibility disappears almost immediately and animals occupy inaccessible depth zones. Population estimates for Amazon bull sharks therefore remain little more than informed speculation. This uncertainty creates an unusual scientific condition. Few large predators on Earth remain so physically close to human activity while also remaining so poorly observed. The bull shark is large enough to injure or kill a person, yet it inhabits regions of the river humans themselves cannot truly enter in any meaningful visual sense. Its existence inside the basin becomes a quiet expression of the river's broader contradiction. A powerful animal moves continuously through the Amazon's hidden interior, leaving measurable traces but almost no direct image behind. The predator is real, documented, and biologically understood in fragments, yet the environment surrounding it remains largely beyond human sight. Each year, the Amazon begins to rise long before the transformation becomes visible from the ground. Rainfall accumulating across distant tributaries moves gradually through the basin, carrying the season itself downstream. Water levels climb centimeter by centimeter until the river slips beyond its familiar boundaries and spreads outward across the lowlands. What appears during dry months to be stable geography reveals itself instead as a temporary arrangement between forest and current. This cycle is known as the flood pulse. Unlike conventional rivers that remain largely confined within fixed channels, the Amazon expands and contracts across enormous scales every year, reshaping the entire basin through alternating periods of inundation and retreat. During low water seasons, certain sections of the main channel measure roughly 5 kilometers across. Months later, floodwaters may extend outward into floodplains approaching 500 kilometers in width. The transformation affects an area of nearly 300,000 square kilometers, larger than the entire United Kingdom. Forests disappear beneath rising water for 4 to 6 months at a time. In some regions, the flood reaches depths of 15 meters among the trees, submerging trunks almost to the canopy and converting terrestrial ecosystems into temporary aquatic worlds. This flooded forest is known as várzea. Within it, the distinction between river and land dissolves almost completely. Fish move through submerged branches, feeding on fruit and seeds hanging directly above the waterline. River dolphins navigate silently between tree trunks in places that only months earlier supported insects, birds, and dry forest soil. Aquatic life disperses outward into spaces that did not exist as water habitats during the previous season. The flood pulse carries more than water alone. Nutrients eroded from mountains, sediments transported through tributaries, decomposing vegetation, and dissolved minerals spread across the basin during each inundation. Organic material settles into floodplain soils before being carried away again during the next seasonal shift. This continual redistribution sustains one of the most biologically productive systems on Earth, connecting river, forest, atmosphere, and sediment through a cycle repeated over millions of years. For scientists attempting to study the deep channel, however, the flood pulse introduces another layer of instability into an already difficult environment. Banks disappear beneath expanding water. Channels divide and reconnect unpredictably through flooded terrain. Currents alter direction and intensity depending on local topography hidden beneath the surface. Navigation markers become unreliable as the river exceeds the boundaries mapped during previous seasons. Even locating the main channel itself becomes difficult in certain regions once the surrounding forest submerges. What had once been a defined river corridor dissolves into an immense aquatic plain threaded through partially submerged canopy. Instruments anchored during dry months may later sit beneath entirely different hydraulic conditions as water depth and flow patterns change around them. The animals of the basin respond dynamically to this expansion. Fish tracked within deep channels during low water disperse outward into flooded forest habitats where acoustic monitoring becomes nearly impossible. Predators follow prey into newly accessible territory. Migratory routes shift with the changing waterline. Entire biological communities relocate seasonally across distances difficult to measure with precision. The Amazon, therefore, exists not as a fixed river system, but as a rhythmic transformation moving continuously between states. Its geography expands and contracts like breathing, carrying forests underwater and releasing them again, while life throughout the basin adjusts itself to the pulse with extraordinary fluidity. Far beneath the visible basin, below the forests, floodplains, and sediment layers carried eastward across the continent. Another movement continues through darkness inside the Earth itself. It does not cut channels through open rock or form underground caverns filled with rushing water. Its presence is quieter than that, almost geological in its stillness. Yet by scale alone, it rivals the system above it. In 2011, Brazilian geologist Valia Hamza announced evidence for a second river flowing beneath the Amazon basin, approximately 4 kilometers underground. The structure would later become known as the Hamza River, though the word river in this case describes something profoundly different from the immense surface channel visible from satellites and shorelines. The Hamza does not move as open water. Instead, it migrates slowly through porous sedimentary rock, seeping across microscopic spaces buried deep beneath the continent. Its movement resembles a continental scale filtration system more than a conventional current. Yet, despite this slow behavior, the dimensions involved are extraordinary. Estimates place its length near 6,000 kilometers, extending roughly parallel to the Amazon itself from west to east beneath the basin. In some regions, researchers believe it may even exceed the surface river in width. Its speed, however, belongs to another world entirely. The Amazon above can move at roughly 5 meters per second in constricted sections. The Hamza advances at approximately 1 millimeter per hour. Water that would cross the visible river in moments may require centuries to travel comparable underground distances below it. The discovery emerged not from direct exploration, but from old industrial records left dormant for decades. During the 1970s and 1980s, Petrobras drilled hundreds of oil exploration wells across the basin. Many were later abandoned, but the wells retained valuable geothermal measurements collected during drilling operations. Hamza and his colleagues analyzed temperature gradients from 241 of these wells, searching for patterns in subterranean heat flow. Certain regions displayed anomalies that standard geological models could not adequately explain. Heat moved through the subsurface differently than expected, suggesting the presence of slow but massive underground water circulation altering thermal transfer through the rock. By comparing data across vast distances, researchers gradually assembled evidence for a coherent buried hydrological system extending beneath the basin. Unlike the Amazon, the Hamza possesses no visible mouth. Its water eventually disperses into the Atlantic through deep sediment layers beneath the seafloor itself, leaking gradually into the ocean hundreds of kilometers offshore. Oceanographers studying salinity patterns near the northeastern coast of South America had long observed unusual freshwater dilution in regions difficult to explain through surface discharge alone. The underground seepage associated with the Hamza offered a possible explanation for part of that anomaly. No human being has ever seen the Hamza River directly. There are no photographs, no underwater surveys, and no visible banks hidden underground waiting to be explored. Its existence emerges entirely through inference, through temperature signatures, pressure relationships, and the subtle behavior of water moving invisibly through ancient rock. In this way, the Hamza becomes perhaps the purest expression of the Amazon's deeper mystery. Beneath one of the largest rivers on Earth, another river may be flowing silently through darkness, known only by the traces it leaves behind in stone, heat, and distant seawater. High in the Andes, rain falls against exposed rock with quiet persistence. Thin streams gather beneath glaciers and cloud forest, carrying microscopic fragments of mountain downward through narrow valleys. Stone becomes silt gradually, broken apart by water, gravity, and time. By the time these particles reach the lowlands thousands of kilometers away, they have joined one of the largest sediment transport systems on Earth. Each year, the Amazon carries approximately 1.2 billion tons of sediment into the Atlantic Ocean. The quantity is so immense that over geological timescales, it has reshaped coastlines and altered the structure of an ocean basin. Much of the material begins its journey in the Andes, where steep terrain and heavy rainfall erode the mountains continuously. Tributaries descending eastward gather clay, sand, organic debris, and dissolved minerals before merging into larger channels that feed the main river. The sediment never truly settles during transit. It remains suspended through turbulence and constant flow, moving across the continent in a slow mineral migration toward the sea. Satellites observing the Atlantic from orbit can detect the process directly. Near the mouth of the Amazon, a vast brown plume extends outward into ocean water for nearly 300 kilometers, spreading through surface currents like diluted earth dissolving into the Atlantic. Yet the plume represents only the visible fraction of a much larger transformation occurring below the surface. For millions of years, the Amazon has deposited sediment along the northeastern edge of South America, gradually building portions of the continental margin farther into the ocean. Coastlines shifted outward through repeated accumulation, while older deposits compressed beneath newer layers. The river has functioned not merely as a transport system, but as a continental construction process operating continuously across deep time. Far offshore, this accumulation forms the Amazon Fan, an enormous underwater deposit extending approximately 700 kilometers into the Atlantic and descending to depths approaching 4,000 meters. Buried beneath the ocean, the fan ranks among the largest geological structures ever created by a river system. Layer upon layer of sediment, settled there through countless seasonal cycles, preserving ancient channel deposits beneath newer material as the basin evolved above. Inside those layers lies a detailed archive of environmental history. Sediment cores extracted from the fan contain preserved pollen, mineral composition changes, microscopic organisms, and chemical signatures recording shifts in rainfall, vegetation, erosion, and climate across millions of years. Some cores preserve continuous records extending back nearly 10 million years, reaching toward the period when the modern eastward Amazon first emerged after the uplift of the Andes. Scientists studying these deposits can reconstruct ancient drought periods, fluctuations in forest cover, and changes in continental weather patterns long before human observation existed. Even the chemistry of distant oceans becomes visible through the debris carried outward by the river. The Amazon's sediment preserves evidence not only of the basin itself, but of atmospheric and climatic conditions affecting much of South America across geological time. There is a quiet irony within this process. The same suspended material that blinds cameras, confuses sonar, and conceals the riverbed also preserves one of the richest long-term environmental records on Earth. The Amazon continuously obscures direct observation while simultaneously documenting its own history grain by grain. Every particle moving through the basin carries information from somewhere upstream, from mountains, forests, floodplains, rainfall, and ancient rock slowly dissolving into motion. The river appears chaotic at the surface, yet within its sediment lies an orderly archive extending backward through millions of years of planetary change. Most great rivers loosen as they approach the sea. Their currents divide into branching channels that spread outward through marshes, sediment islands, and shallow deltas before dissolving gradually into the ocean. The Nile does this. The Mississippi does this. the Amazon behaves differently. After crossing nearly an entire continent, it does not fragment delicately at the coastline. It arrives at the Atlantic as a single immense discharge, carrying enough fresh water to alter the chemistry of the ocean itself. The mouth of the Amazon stretches approximately 330 kilometers across, making it the widest river mouth on Earth. Its scale disrupts ordinary perception. From the central region of the estuary, neither bank remains visible. Horizon replaces shoreline completely. The distinction between river and ocean begins to lose meaning, because every direction appears to contain only moving water beneath open sky. Within this enormous opening lies Marajo, an island of such size that it exceeds Switzerland in area. Covering roughly 40,000 square kilometers, it occupies the northern side of the estuary where tides, channels, and freshwater currents surround it continuously. Though technically classified as an island, Marajo exists inside a hydrological environment so vast that its boundaries blur into the surrounding system. Much of the water around it remains overwhelmingly fresh despite direct proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. The Amazon's discharge pushes far beyond the coastline. Fresh water extends hundreds of kilometers into the Atlantic, forming a broad, low salinity surface layer carried northeastward by ocean currents. Satellites detect this plume as a distinct zone differing in color, temperature, and chemistry from surrounding seawater. Even far offshore, the river continues influencing the ocean through diluted salinity and suspended sediment spreading gradually outward across the continental shelf. Beneath the surface, the meeting between river and ocean becomes extraordinarily complex. Freshwater and saltwater do not merge instantly into uniform mixture. Instead, they form layered gradients shaped by density, temperature, tides, and current velocity. In some regions, lighter fresh water flows above denser marine water, while turbulent mixing zones oscillate continuously between them. Chemical conditions shift with depth and distance from shore, creating environments where marine and freshwater influences overlap unevenly. These gradients affect nearly every form of life within the estuary. Certain organisms occupy narrow salinity ranges that expand or contract seasonally as river discharge changes. Plankton communities reorganize themselves across invisible chemical boundaries. Fish species adapted to brackish water migrate through transitional corridors where freshwater dilution reaches specific concentrations. Sediment transported from the basin settles differently depending on tidal energy and ocean circulation, continually reshaping underwater topography near the coast. The ecosystem formed there is so extensive and dynamic that scientists increasingly study it as a distinct environment rather than merely the endpoint of the river. New microbial communities, fish distributions, and biochemical interactions continue to be documented within the estuarine plume, many shaped by conditions unlike those found elsewhere in either rivers or oceans alone. Even at the edge of the Atlantic, the Amazon resists simple categorization. Its mouth behaves less like a boundary and more like an expansion, carrying the river outward into the sea without fully surrendering its identity. Freshwater, sediment, chemistry, and current continue moving together long after the coastline disappears behind them, extending the influence of the basin far beyond the continent itself. After sunset, the river changes character without changing appearance. The surface remains dark and opaque as it was during daylight, yet beneath it, movement begins to reorganize across the water column. Animals that spent the day holding close to the bottom start rising gradually upward through the current, while others descend into deeper layers before dawn returns. The transformation cannot be watched directly. It becomes visible only through traces carried by sound. Marine biologists have long known about diel vertical migration in the open ocean, a daily movement in which countless organisms travel upward at night and retreat downward by morning. For decades, researchers assumed the Amazon's extreme turbidity would prevent similar large scale migrations from functioning clearly within the river system. Only in the early 2000s did acoustic monitoring begin confirming that deep channel species in the Amazon were performing comparable nightly movements through the darkness. Hydrophones lowered into deep sections of the river record a distinct increase in biological activity after dusk. During daylight hours, certain channels produce relatively sparse acoustic signatures beyond the constant rush of current and sediment movement. After nightfall, the recordings become denser and more complex. Sharp clicks emerge intermittently from beneath the surface. Rhythmic pulses repeat through the water at low frequencies. Vibrational patterns drift through the current from animals that remain almost entirely undetectable during the day. Electric eels contribute to this nocturnal activity in unusual ways. Although capable of extracting oxygen through gills, they also rely heavily on atmospheric air intake. Throughout the night, individuals rise from deeper water toward the surface, inhale briefly, then descend again into darkness below. The behavior creates a vertical rhythm repeated continuously across certain habitats, with animals surfacing silently before disappearing once more beneath opaque water. Large catfish display even more dramatic movement patterns. Acoustic tracking studies have detected individuals exceeding 1.5 meters in length, ascending from depths near 60 meters to within 5 meters of the surface between midnight and 3 in the morning. Before dawn, they retreat downward again into deeper channels. Researchers do not yet fully understand what drives these migrations. Feeding opportunities, oxygen gradients, temperature variation, and reproductive behavior may all contribute simultaneously within different species and habitats. The night river, therefore, functions as a separate ecological condition layered atop the daytime system. Species redistribute themselves vertically through water that remains visually inaccessible in every lighting condition. Even powerful artificial illumination reveals almost nothing beneath the surface, forcing researchers to study the process primarily through acoustics rather than observation. Listening becomes the primary form of exploration. Hydrophones capture collisions between suspended debris and fish bodies moving through current. Some sounds resemble distant tapping. Others arrive as drawn-out resonant vibrations, difficult to associate confidently with any known species. Biologists analyzing these recordings often work backward from sound alone, attempting to infer movement, size, and behavior without ever seeing the organisms responsible. By 3 in the morning, activity within certain deep channels reaches levels impossible to imagine from the stillness visible above. Large animals move vertically through complete darkness while pressure, sediment, and current continue surrounding them. Entire acoustic landscapes emerge temporarily beneath the surface, then fade again toward dawn. And because the river conceals these movements from direct sight so completely, much of the Amazon's nocturnal ecology remains suspended somewhere between measurement and mystery, existing vividly in sound while remaining almost entirely unseen. Long before bathymetric surveys, acoustic sensors, or satellite altimetry entered the basin, knowledge of the Amazon already existed in memory, language, and repeated movement through the river itself. For at least 11,000 years, indigenous communities have lived alongside these waterways, traveling through seasonal floods, observing animal migrations, and learning the shifting behavior of currents across generations. Much of that knowledge was never written down because it did not need to be. It survived through repetition, story, navigation, and careful attention to the rhythms of the basin. Today, more than 400 distinct indigenous groups continue to inhabit the Amazon basin, many associated closely with specific tributaries, floodplains, or forest regions. Certain communities know stretches of river with extraordinary detail, not as abstract geography, but as lived terrain shaped by memory and use. Fishing grounds, submerged hazards, seasonal channels, and breeding sites become part of oral tradition carried through language rather than maps. Among several groups, records of flood behavior extend backward across many generations. Elders recount years when waters rose unusually high or retreated too early, when fish migrations shifted unexpectedly, or when particular channels became inaccessible during certain seasons. In some cases, these oral histories preserve environmental observations older than any formal scientific monitoring record available for the same regions. The river's pulse was tracked continuously through human experience long before modern hydrology attempted to quantify it. Indigenous fishermen have also described encounters with large unidentified animals inhabiting deeper sections of the basin. Some accounts speak of fish unlike known species, massive bodies moving below boats, or unusual sounds emerging from beneath the current at night. Many descriptions remain unverified by biological surveys, existing only within local testimony repeated across decades or centuries. In scientific literature, such reports are often treated cautiously, yet the basin's enormous undocumented biodiversity leaves open the possibility that certain observations may refer to species still unknown to formal taxonomy. The Munduruku people, living along the Tapajos River, possess particularly detailed navigational knowledge shaped through thousands of years of movement across changing channels. Experienced navigators memorize underwater formations, current behavior, hidden sandbars, and submerged obstacles without relying on external instruments. Their understanding of river morphology often exists as complex mental mapping built through continuous familiarity with seasonal variation. In many areas, this practical geographic knowledge exceeds what has been formally surveyed by Western science. Traditional ecological knowledge has already contributed directly to modern biological discovery. During the past 2 decades, at least 3 fish species were formally identified by researchers only after indigenous communities described them in detail and guided scientists toward their habitats. These animals were not newly evolved or recently arrived. They had been recognized, named, and understood locally for generations before appearing in academic literature. Much of this knowledge remains inseparable from language itself. Ecological understanding is embedded within vocabulary, place names, classifications of water conditions, and distinctions between species that may not translate cleanly into Portuguese, Spanish, or English. As indigenous languages disappear through cultural displacement and extinction, entire frameworks for interpreting the basin disappear with them. The deepest archive of the Amazon, therefore, does not exist solely within sediment cores, sonar readings, or genetic databases. It also survives within human memory carried through stories, speech, and lived relationships with the river, forms of knowledge shaped slowly across millennia beside a landscape that still resists complete explanation. Maps of the Amazon's deep channel often begin with blank spaces, interrupted survey lines, and notes written beside corrupted data. Failure has accumulated here slowly across decades, not through lack of effort, but through repeated encounters with conditions that overwhelm the instruments brought into the river. Each expedition arrived, believing the next improvement in technology might finally hold steady long enough to see beneath the surface. None remained there for long. During the 1950s, Brazilian oceanographer Harold Scioli organized one of the first systematic scientific efforts to survey the Amazon's deeper channels. The project attempted to gather reliable measurements of depth, sediment transport, and current structure across portions of the main river. At the time, researchers still assumed the basin would gradually yield to conventional hydrological methods once enough fieldwork had been conducted. Instead, instruments malfunctioned repeatedly under heavy sediment exposure and unstable flow conditions. Mechanical systems jammed, acoustic readings drifted inconsistently, and navigation became unreliable across shifting channels. Before the expedition ended, less than 2% of the main channel had been surveyed successfully. More ambitious attempts followed. In 1978, the Brazilian government launched a national initiative to produce a complete bathymetric map of the Amazon using advanced sonar systems considered state of the art for the period. Survey teams spent 3 years moving through sections of the basin, collecting acoustic measurements intended to reveal the structure of the riverbed in detail, yet the river continuously altered the conditions beneath them. Flood cycles changed channel geometry faster than mapping could be completed. Suspended sediment scattered sonar, returns unpredictably. Vast areas remained inaccessible during seasonal expansion. Eventually, the project was abandoned after researchers concluded that existing technology could not produce a stable or reliable map of the basin floor. The pattern continued into the 21st century. In 2004, a joint Brazilian American research team deployed a modified remotely operated vehicle into a deep channel section near Santarém. The craft had been reinforced for pressure and equipped with stabilization systems adapted from oceanographic exploration platforms. Within 90 minutes, strong subsurface current destabilized the vehicle beyond recovery. Sediment infiltrated propulsion mechanisms while hydraulic force drove the craft against submerged debris. The river destroyed the machine before meaningful visual observation could occur. 5 years later, researchers attempted to map a 200-kilometer section of the main channel using side-scan sonar technology designed to generate wide acoustic images of underwater terrain. The data initially appeared extensive, but analysis revealed severe distortion caused by acoustic turbidity. Dense, suspended particles scattered sound waves so intensely that bottom structure became nearly impossible to separate from interference patterns within the water column itself. The resulting maps were judged scientifically unusable. Even the discovery of the Hamza River emerged indirectly rather than through successful exploration. Researchers identified it only after analyzing decades-old oil industry well records collected for unrelated drilling operations. One of the basin's most extraordinary hidden systems revealed itself accidentally through archived geothermal anomalies instead of direct observation. As of 2024, no institution in the world maintains a fully funded active program dedicated specifically to comprehensive mapping of the Amazon riverbed. Among specialists, the challenge is often described not as temporarily difficult, but as fundamentally beyond current technological capability. And so the deepest parts of the basin remain largely unobserved, while expedition after expedition returns to the surface carrying the same quiet conclusion that the river itself has consistently refused to cooperate with the effort to fully know it. The clearest view of the Amazon does not come from a boat drifting across its surface or from instruments lowered into its channels. It comes from orbit, where the river can be studied from hundreds of kilometers above the Earth. From that distance, patterns hidden within the basin begin to reveal themselves with surprising clarity. Floodplains brighten and darken through seasonal cycles. Channels migrate slowly across the forest, and the immense scale of the watershed becomes visible all at once. In 2000, NASA's Shuttle Radar Topography mission produced the first complete topographic map of the Amazon basin. Radar instruments carried aboard the space shuttle measured subtle differences in elevation across millions of square kilometers, generating a detailed model of the landscape below. For the first time, researchers could examine the basin as a continuous physical system rather than a fragmented collection of isolated field sites. Yet even this remarkable achievement carried a strange limitation. The mission mapped the surface of the Earth, not the hidden structure beneath the river itself. Much of the Amazon remains permanently covered by dense cloud layers, making traditional optical imaging unreliable across large regions. Synthetic aperture radar changed that limitation by using microwave signals capable of penetrating cloud cover. From orbit, these radar systems tracked the river's lateral movement, measured the expansion of seasonal flooding, and revealed how channels shifted gradually across the basin over time. Entire floodplains emerged and disappeared rhythmically through data collected far above the atmosphere. Satellite altimetry added another layer of understanding. By measuring the height of water surfaces to within centimeters, researchers could calculate discharge volume, current variation, and seasonal flow patterns without entering the river at all. The Amazon began revealing itself indirectly through mathematics and orbital observation, as though distance itself had become more effective than proximity. Aircraft-based LiDAR surveys during the 2010s transformed understanding of the forest above the basin as well. Pulses of laser light passed through small gaps in the canopy and reflected from the ground below, allowing archaeologists to reconstruct hidden terrain beneath dense vegetation. Thousands of previously unknown earthworks, settlements, and geometric structures appeared across the basin. Some regions revealed evidence of large pre-Columbian urban centers built deliberately on elevated terrain above flood zones, suggesting populations far larger and more organized than earlier assumptions allowed. Even the hidden Hamza River contributed faint signatures visible from space. Thermal infrared satellite imagery detected subtle temperature anomalies in Atlantic surface waters near the northeastern coast of South America. These variations aligned with models predicting underground freshwater seepage from deep sediment layers beneath the ocean floor. Though indirect, the observations helped support evidence for the buried river system flowing silently beneath the basin. There is a strange inversion within all of this. The Amazon's surface hydrology, flood behavior, watershed geometry, and atmospheric influence can often be measured more effectively from orbit than from within the river itself. Scientists can monitor seasonal inundation across hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, while remaining unable to directly observe large portions of the riverbed lying only meters below opaque water. No other major river system on Earth behaves quite this way. In most places, closeness increases understanding. In the Amazon, distance sometimes becomes the only reliable perspective available. From 400 kilometers above the planet, the basin reveals continental scale, order, and movement. 10 meters below the surface, it returns again to darkness, sediment, and uncertainty. Water entering the Amazon basin does not arrive as a single uniform substance. Each tributary carries its own dissolved minerals, acids, sediments, and organic compounds gathered from the landscapes it has crossed. By the time these rivers converge, the basin has become less like one connected waterway and more like a moving mosaic of different chemical worlds flowing beside and beneath one another. Some of the most unusual conditions emerge in blackwater rivers, such as the Rio Negro. Their dark coloration comes from tannins and humic acids released by decaying vegetation across flooded forest and wet soil. The resulting water can reach a pH as low as 3.5, comparable in acidity to tomato juice. Yet, despite these chemically harsh conditions, blackwater habitats support extraordinary biodiversity. Fish, microorganisms, and aquatic plants have adapted over millions of years to environments containing very low nutrient concentrations and highly acidic water. Certain species survive nowhere else. Elsewhere in the basin, whitewater rivers descending from the Andes carry suspended minerals eroded from mountain rock. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, and phosphorus dissolve gradually into the current as tributaries move eastward across the continent. These mineral-rich waters flood surrounding plains seasonally, depositing fertile sediment that supports some of the most agriculturally productive soils in South America. Entire floodplain ecosystems depend on these nutrient pulses moving outward from the Andes through the river system. Where blackwater and whitewater rivers meet, the chemistry becomes even more complex. Near Manaus, the Rio Negro joins the Amazon in one of the most striking hydrological encounters on Earth, often called the meeting of the waters. Differences in temperature, sediment load, density, and flow velocity prevent immediate mixing. Dark, acidic water and pale sediment-rich water continue flowing side by side for many kilometers before gradually blending together downstream. Within these mixing zones, chemical gradients form across enormous distances. Acidity, dissolved oxygen, mineral concentration, and conductivity vary continuously through the water column. These differences do not remain confined to the surface. At depths between 30 and 50 meters, chemical conditions can diverge dramatically from those above, creating layered habitats functioning almost independently within the same river channel. In certain deep blackwater sections, dissolved oxygen declines toward near zero concentrations. Organic material decomposes continuously, while limited circulation prevents rapid replenishment from surface water. These hypoxic zones restrict survival to organisms specially adapted for low oxygen conditions. Some fish increase gill surface area to extract trace amounts of oxygen more efficiently. Others supplement aquatic respiration by surfacing periodically for air intake. Microbial communities shift as well, favoring species capable of surviving under chemically extreme conditions that would suffocate many aquatic organisms elsewhere. The deeper scientists examine the basin chemically, the more fragmented and heterogeneous the river becomes. Two neighboring channels may support entirely different biological communities because their mineral balance, acidity, and oxygen structure differ subtly but persistently across depth and season. Yet direct sampling of these deep chemical environments remains astonishingly limited. Across the Amazon's 6,400-kilometer length, fewer than 50 locations have undergone comprehensive deep water chemical analysis. Vast sections of the basin still exist only as estimated models built from scattered measurements separated by thousands of kilometers of unsampled river. And so, beneath the opaque surface, invisible boundaries continue moving through the basin continuously, shaping the distribution of life through chemistry alone, long before any organism instrument, or human observer enters the water itself. In some parts of the Amazon, vision became so unreliable that evolution gradually turned away from light altogether. Water darkened by tannins and suspended sediment reduced visibility to almost nothing, especially within deep black water habitats where sunlight vanished only centimeters below the surface. Yet, life continued adapting inside that obscurity, not by sharpening eyesight, but by developing entirely different ways of perceiving the world. The Amazon basin now contains more electric fish species than any other river system on Earth. More than 200 known species generate, detect, or manipulate electric fields as part of their daily survival. To human senses, the river may appear silent and opaque beneath the surface. To these animals, it exists as a dense landscape of electrical signals constantly moving through the water. Among the most famous are electric eels, though they are not true eels at all but highly specialized knife fish. Their elongated bodies contain stacked electrocytes, modified muscle cells capable of producing controlled electrical discharge. They generate two separate systems simultaneously. Low voltage pulses flow continuously through the surrounding water, functioning as navigation and communication signals. These weak discharges allow the animal to detect nearby objects through distortions in its electric field. When hunting or defending itself, the eel can release powerful bursts, reaching approximately 860 volts, enough to stun large animals instantly within close range. Other species operate more delicately. Weakly electric fish, such as the black ghost knife fish, emit constant low voltage fields surrounding their bodies like invisible sensory envelopes. Nearby rocks, plants, predators, and prey subtly alter the field's shape. Specialized receptors distributed across the skin detect these distortions continuously, allowing the fish to navigate with remarkable precision in complete darkness. This sensory system, known as electrolocation, functions independently of light and remains unaffected by the turbidity that blinds optical vision. The evolutionary pressure driving these abilities appears closely tied to the Amazon's blackwater environment itself. In habitats where visual information became increasingly unreliable, electrical perception offered a more stable method for interpreting surroundings. Over millions of years, certain species refined these capabilities into extraordinarily sophisticated systems adapted specifically for murky and sediment-filled water. Communication evolved alongside navigation. Electric fish exchange information through modulated electrical pulses, varying in frequency, spacing, and intensity. Different pulse patterns can signal aggression, territorial boundaries, courtship behavior, or species identity. Entire interactions unfold silently within electrical frequencies, undetectable to most other organisms in the river. Research conducted during the 2010s revealed that species inhabiting deeper and darker blackwater habitats often possess more complex electrical signaling systems than relatives living in clearer water conditions. Scientists observed greater variation in pulse structure and more intricate communication patterns among fish occupying regions where light penetration was especially limited. Darkness itself may have accelerated the evolution of richer electrical communication, transforming the river into a sensory environment fundamentally different from human perception. To animals adapted this way, the Amazon is neither silent nor dark. Electrical fields ripple constantly through the water, carrying information about movement, shape, distance, and identity. Every living body becomes part of a shifting network of signals, extending outward through conductive current. Human instruments can detect fragments of this activity, but only imperfectly. electroreceptors refined through millions of years of evolution still surpass most artificial systems designed to study them. Beneath the surface, countless electrical conversations continue invisibly through the basin, forming another hidden layer of Amazon life that exists almost entirely beyond ordinary human senses. Beneath the suspended sediment and shifting current of the Amazon's deeper channels, catfish dominate the river in astonishing diversity. The basin contains approximately 1,300 described species, representing nearly 14% of all catfish species known on Earth. Ichthyologists believe hundreds more remain formally undescribed, hidden within tributaries, blackwater habitats, and deep channel environments where biological surveys remain sparse or incomplete. Many Amazon catfish are small, secretive scavengers adapted to narrow ecological niches. Others reach extraordinary scale. The largest among them is the Piraiba, a massive migratory predator capable of growing beyond 3 meters in length and exceeding 200 kilograms in weight. Its body is pale and elongated, built for movement through powerful current rather than visibility or camouflage. Most of its life unfolds below 40 meters within the main channel, inside precisely the region that human beings have never directly observed in natural field conditions. Researchers studying Piraiba behavior rely almost entirely on acoustic tagging and fisheries data. Tagged individuals have been recorded migrating more than 1,000 kilometers along the Amazon's main channel, navigating continuously through water where vision contributes almost nothing. Instead, these fish depend heavily on the lateral line system running along their bodies, a network of sensory organs capable of detecting minute pressure changes and vibrations moving through surrounding current. In darkness, filled with turbulence and suspended debris, pressure itself becomes a form of perception. Another giant, Brachyplatystoma filamentosum, often called the Goliath catfish, undertakes one of the longest freshwater migrations known anywhere on Earth. Spawning begins near the foothills of the Andes, where larvae drift eastward through tributaries before continuing toward the Atlantic side of the basin. Over the course of their lives, individuals may travel more than 5,000 kilometers entirely underwater through environments ranging from sediment-rich whitewater to oxygen-poor blackwater systems. Much of this migration occurs through conditions of near total visual obscurity. The feeding ecology of large Amazon catfish reveals the strange vertical structure of the river itself. Stomach content analysis has uncovered remains of fish, crustaceans, birds, and small mammals carried downward after death from the surface or floodplain. In several documented cases, researchers also identified human remains recovered from the digestive systems of large catfish. The fish are not hunters of humans, but scavengers occupying depths where sinking organic material eventually settles into darkness below. These predators, therefore, participate in a hidden recycling system, linking surface life with the unseen deep channel beneath it. Material falling from above enters territories occupied almost exclusively by animals adapted to pressure, current, and darkness. Despite their size, many of these catfish remain poorly understood scientifically. Spawning grounds for several species remain uncertain. Population estimates are often incomplete across enormous regions of the basin. Even basic behavioral patterns continue emerging slowly through fragmented, acoustic tracking studies and occasional fishing records. And so, the deepest channels of the Amazon remain ruled by animals rarely seen alive in their natural environment. Their migrations continue beneath opaque water across distances spanning entire countries, guided through pressure gradients and current alone. They occupy one of the least observed predator systems on Earth, apex hunters moving through a world still concealed from direct human sight, a kingdom existing continuously below the limit of visibility. Long before sunrise reaches the upper canopy, Bodo move through the submerged architecture of the Amazon with almost silent precision. Their bodies pass between drowned trunks and suspended roots where current folds around entire forests during flood season. In these dark corridors, vision contributes little. The river dolphin experiences its world through bursts of sound, shaping space from echoes returning through opaque water. The boto is the largest freshwater dolphin on Earth, capable of reaching 2.5 meters in length. Young individuals are generally gray, but many develop a pink coloration as they age, especially mature males whose skin accumulates scar tissue from social competition and contact with submerged debris. In the muted water of the Amazon, the color appears less vivid than photographs suggest, more like a faint flush beneath the surface. Unlike oceanic dolphins, the boto possesses an unusually flexible neck. Its cervical vertebrae remain unfused, allowing the head to rotate nearly 90 degrees in either direction. This adaptation transforms the animal into a remarkably agile navigator within flooded forest environments. During the annual flood pulse, when immense areas of woodland disappear beneath meters of water, Bado weaves slowly between branches that would trap or injure rigid-bodied marine dolphins. Their echolocation system is among the most sophisticated known in any cetacean. Bodo emit rapid clicking pulses, reaching frequencies of approximately 200 kilohertz, constructing detailed acoustic maps of surroundings where sunlight never penetrates. Laboratory and field studies indicate that these echoes can resolve objects smaller than 1 centimeter. In the Amazon, where suspended sediment and tannins erase visual distance almost immediately below the surface, echolocation becomes not merely an aid, but the primary architecture of perception itself. Acoustic tracking has recorded Bodo descending to depths approaching 40 meters in major channel systems. At those depths, dissolved oxygen declines, pressure increases, and visibility remains permanently absent. Yet the dolphins continue navigating with apparent ease through environments that challenge nearly every human instrument placed there. Their movements suggest familiarity with underwater terrain still unknown to science. Although boto are large mammals that must surface regularly for air, deep channel observations remain surprisingly rare. Individuals typically surface for only brief moments, exhaling softly before slipping back beneath the water with little disturbance. In wide sections of the river, especially at night, their appearances can seem almost unreal, a small curve of motion vanishing immediately into darkness again. Surface camera traps positioned above deep channel habitats have captured nighttime surfacing behavior over waters exceeding 70 meters in depth. The recordings reveal dolphins emerging singly or in pairs between intervals of complete stillness. What occupies them below remains uncertain. Researchers do not yet fully understand whether these depths function primarily as feeding grounds, migration corridors, social territory, or refuge from seasonal environmental change. The Bado has therefore become more than a biological curiosity within Amazon science. Because the species depends on complex floodplain connectivity, stable fish populations, and healthy deep channel systems, researchers increasingly use its presence as an indicator of ecological integrity across the basin. Yet even this animal, among the best-known inhabitants of the river, disappears into habitats that remain beyond direct observation. Far below the surface, beneath layers of sediment and darkness, the bodo continues moving through a landscape still assembled mostly from inference, sound, and fleeting contact with the air above. Far beyond the visible current, beneath the shifting dunes of sand and suspended silt, the Amazon stores its oldest memories in silence. Each flood season presses another thin layer onto the riverbed, burying fragments of vanished forests, microscopic shells, spores carried on ancient winds, and grains of pollen that once drifted through climates no longer present on Earth. The river does not preserve history in monuments or exposed rock faces. It hides its past beneath moving water, compressed into dark sediment that thickens grain by grain over immense spans of time. To geologists and paleoclimatologists, these sediments function as an archive written without language. A narrow cylindrical core extracted from deep deposits can contain tens of thousands of years stacked vertically in delicate sequence. Near the top lie recent centuries, marked by modern vegetation and traces of industrial chemistry carried downstream from distant cities. Far deeper, the material changes gradually. Pollen from rainforest trees declines, grassland species appear. Tiny fossilized microorganisms shift in abundance, recording changes in rainfall, temperature, and river flow long before human observation existed. Much of this information has been recovered not from the river itself, but from the enormous Amazon fan extending into the Atlantic Ocean. Over millions of years, the river has pushed sediment hundreds of kilometers offshore, building one of the largest depositional structures on Earth. There, beneath layers of marine mud, scientists have extracted cores preserving climate records stretching back approximately 10 million years. Within those sediments are signs that the basin has not always resembled the humid world known today. Some layers indicate periods of dramatic aridity when rainfall weakened across South America and river discharge declined severely. During certain intervals, parts of the Amazon may have contracted into isolated pockets of forest separated by open, dry habitat. One of the most significant of these episodes occurred around 20,000 years ago during the last glacial maximum. Cooler global temperatures altered atmospheric circulation patterns, reducing precipitation across large portions of the basin. In these fragmented refugia, separated populations of plants and animals evolved independently over generations, contributing to the astonishing biodiversity that now defines the modern rainforest. Deeper still, buried beneath the active riverbed, lie paleochannels, ancient river pathways, abandoned long before the present drainage system stabilized. These fossil channels preserve evidence of a landscape shaped before the Andes Mountains fully redirected the continent's waters eastward. Radar imaging and sediment analysis reveal traces of rivers that once flowed along entirely different routes across South America, remnants of vanished hydrological worlds concealed beneath younger deposits. Carbon dating performed on organic material recovered near the river's mouth has produced ages exceeding 50,000 years. Some fragments settled into the mud before modern humans entered the Americas. Leaves, wood fibers, and microscopic organic particles from ecosystems long disappeared remain preserved within oxygen, poor sediment, where decomposition slowed almost to stillness. Yet, recovering this archive remains extraordinarily difficult. The same current that transports the sediment also obscures it. Drilling operations must penetrate unstable underwater deposits while contending with powerful flow, collapsing boreholes, and continuous sediment movement. Even locating undisturbed layers within such a dynamic environment presents enormous technical challenges. The memories remain intact below the river, waiting within darkness that rarely opens long enough for human instruments to reach them. At the surface, the Amazon often appears slow, almost heavy with stillness. Brown water drifts beneath floating vegetation, carrying reflections of cloud and forest in broken fragments. Yet, far below that surface calm, The physical forces inside the river accumulate layer by layer with increasing intensity. Every descent downward adds weight. Every meter compresses water against itself until the deep channel becomes an environment governed almost entirely by pressure and motion. Water pressure increases by approximately 1 atmosphere every 10 meters. In the deepest confirmed sections of the Amazon, where the riverbed descends beyond 90 meters, the pressure reaches roughly 10 atmospheres. By oceanic standards, this is not extraordinary. Submersibles routinely descend thousands of meters beneath the sea, but the Amazon does not behave like the open ocean. Pressure here exists alongside violent current, suspended sediment, unstable bottom terrain, and complete visual opacity, creating a combination of stresses that conventional exploration technology was never designed to endure simultaneously. Near Abydos, where the enormous width of the river contracts into a geological bottleneck, the full discharge of the Amazon is compressed through a comparatively narrow passage. At depth, current velocities can exceed 2.5 meters per second. Water moving at that speed becomes physically overwhelming. A human entering such flow would lose orientation almost instantly, carried downstream before meaningful reaction became possible. Even heavy equipment struggles to maintain stability against the force. This current transforms the engineering problem completely. Deep ocean remotely operated vehicles function effectively because the surrounding environment is comparatively stable. In abyssal regions of the sea, water movement is often slow and predictable. Cameras remain clear. Thrusters push against relatively clean water. Sonar systems operate without dense clouds of suspended particles interfering with acoustic signals. The Amazon removes all of those advantages at once. Sediment infiltrates motors and filtration systems. Fine particles accumulate around moving components until mechanical resistance increases and cooling efficiency declines. Thrusters powerful enough to resist the current stir additional sediment into suspension, worsening visibility and clogging intake systems even further. Optical instruments become nearly useless within moments. Without reliable cameras, operators must navigate through indirect acoustic data distorted by turbidity and shifting bottom structure. A vehicle capable of sustained exploration within these deep channel environments would therefore require an unusual combination of capabilities rarely demanded together anywhere else on Earth. It would need a pressure-resistant hull, strong enough for repeated deep deployments, while remaining agile within fast current. It would require propulsion systems capable of station keeping against continuous lateral force without ingesting sediment. It would need non-visual navigation systems sophisticated enough to function in permanent darkness and acoustic interference. Even communication becomes difficult in water-dense with suspended particulate matter. Engineers studying the problem have estimated that developing such a platform would likely exceed $50 million before field deployment even began. For comparison, oceanographic technology benefits from decades of military, industrial, and scientific investment driven by shipping, energy extraction, and deep-sea research. The Amazon possesses no equivalent infrastructure of funding. Its deep channel remains scientifically important, yet economically invisible. And so the river persists in a peculiar state of partial unknowability. The deepest sections exist close enough to reach in theory, yet beyond practical access in reality. The technological distance between the present moment and sustained exploration remains unclosed, suspended like the sediment itself within the moving water below. Across the upper reaches of the basin, long clearings now interrupt stretches of forest that once appeared continuous from horizon to horizon. Roads cut through former canopy corridors, exposing pale soil to rainfall that arrives with the same force it always has, but now strikes unprotected ground. The river responds immediately. Every storm carries additional sediment downslope into tributaries already dense with suspended material, thickening waters that were difficult to study even before the landscape began to change. Since 1970, the Amazon basin has lost approximately 17% of its original forest cover, an area comparable in size to France. Much of this loss has occurred along expanding agricultural frontiers, where rainforest is replaced by pasture, soybean cultivation, mining infrastructure, and settlement networks. Trees that once anchored the soil through immense root systems disappear, leaving exposed earth vulnerable to rapid erosion during seasonal rains. Under intact forest, rainfall behaves differently. Water filters gradually through vegetation, leaf litter, and root structures before entering streams. The process slows runoff and stabilizes sediment transport across the basin. Once the forest is removed, this balance changes sharply. Exposed soils can erode between 100 and 1,000 times faster than forest-covered land, sending enormous additional volumes of clay, silt, and organic debris into the river system. For the Amazon's already opaque waters, this shift has consequences extending beyond surface appearance. Increased sediment density intensifies turbidity throughout the water column, reducing the effectiveness of sonar systems already struggling against acoustic scattering. Fine suspended particles interfere with sound propagation, distort bottom returns, and accelerate mechanical wear on research equipment operating below the surface. The scientific challenge, therefore, evolves continuously. The river being studied today is not identical to the river examined decades ago. Conditions for exploration are becoming progressively more hostile with time. The hydrological cycle of the basin also changes as forest disappears. Trees recycle vast quantities of moisture back into the atmosphere through evapotranspiration, helping regulate rainfall across continental scales. When those forests are replaced by cropland or grazing fields, water moves differently through the environment. Rainfall runs rapidly across compacted ground instead of being absorbed slowly into soil. Flood events intensify. Dry seasons lengthen in some regions. The familiar pulse that once expanded and contracted with relative consistency becomes less predictable. Deep channel species appear sensitive to these transformations in ways scientists are only beginning to understand. Certain migratory fish depend not merely on water depth or temperature, but on subtle seasonal patterns in suspended sediment chemistry. The Piraíba, among the largest catfish in the basin, may use specific sediment conditions as environmental cues during spawning migrations. As erosion patterns shift, those cues may change as well, altering reproductive behavior across enormous stretches of river. This creates a profound scientific paradox. The ecosystems most urgently requiring observation are becoming increasingly difficult to observe at all. Sediment thickens, current behavior changes, and habitats destabilize precisely when researchers most need long-term monitoring of deep channel life. Some species inhabiting these inaccessible environments may already be declining without formal recognition. Others may disappear entirely before taxonomy, genetics, or direct observation ever confirms their existence. In the Amazon, extinction can occur not only beyond public awareness, but beyond scientific visibility itself. Hidden within waters that continue carrying the basin's changing landscape slowly eastward toward the sea. At certain moments along the Amazon, especially after midnight when surface wind weakens and boat traffic disappears, the river begins to reveal itself through sound rather than sight. Hydrophones lowered into deep channel sections return recordings dense with vibration, pulses, and distant resonances carried through water too opaque for cameras to penetrate. What emerges is not silence beneath the surface, but a layered acoustic environment continuously shaped by animals, current, sediment, and collapsing earth. Because visual observation fails so quickly in the Amazon, a small number of research teams have turned increasingly toward passive acoustic monitoring. Instead of transmitting signals into the water and waiting for echoes, they simply listen. The method avoids many of the distortions that undermine sonar systems in sediment rich environments. Suspended particles that scatter active sound waves interfere less with passive recording, allowing researchers to detect patterns otherwise hidden within the river. Hydrophones deployed below 30 meters have captured biological activity from depths never directly observed by human eyes. Some recordings contain low-frequency pulses consistent with communication among large catfish species occupying the main channel floor. Others reveal rapid clicking sequences, unlike the echolocation patterns of known river dolphins or electric discharge rhythms documented from identified fish species. The sounds recur across multiple deployments, suggesting stable biological sources rather than random environmental noise. During the 2010s, a Brazilian research group analyzing deep channel recordings identified at least 14 distinct acoustic signatures that could not be matched to any currently described Amazon species. Some patterns resembled rhythmic knocking sounds, separated by long intervals. Others appeared as rising harmonic vibrations, lasting only seconds before vanishing back into background current noise. Without direct visual confirmation, researchers could not determine whether these sounds originated from unknown fish, invertebrates, or complex interactions between water flow and submerged terrain. Yet the river itself contributes as much to the soundscape as the animals within it. Beneath the surface, the Amazon produces a constant geological conversation. Bedload sediment rolling along the bottom creates grinding textures like distant thunder softened by water. Riverbanks weakened by erosion collapse without warning, sending muffled pressure waves outward through submerged channels. Faraway rapids transmit low-frequency vibrations for remarkable distances, carried efficiently through dense water and sediment layers. Listening stations positioned in different tributaries reveal that each section of the basin possesses its own acoustic character. Blackwater systems often sound softer, with fewer abrasive sediment noises and more isolated biological pulses. Whitewater rivers carry louder mechanical textures as mineral-rich sediment drags continuously across the channel floor. During flood season, when forest becomes submerged, additional sounds emerge from drowned landscapes as fish, insects, and moving water interact among submerged trunks and vegetation. The resulting acoustic map remains incomplete. Existing recordings cover less than 5% of the Amazon's main channel, leaving enormous stretches entirely undocumented. Even within monitored areas, interpretation remains difficult because so few species have known acoustic profiles for comparison. Still, for scientists attempting to understand life below 30 meters, these recordings provide the closest thing to direct contact currently possible. Researchers often describe the experience not as discovering a hidden world, but as overhearing one that has existed uninterrupted for millions of years, carrying on beneath the river with no awareness that anything above the surface is listening at all. For most of the Amazon's scientific history, exploration depended on a familiar assumption that understanding required direct observation. Researchers lowered cameras into the water, sent divers beneath the surface, or attempted to map the riverbed through reflected sound. Again and again, the river resisted these efforts, obscuring itself behind sediment, darkness, and motion. In recent years, however, a different approach has begun to emerge, one less dependent on seeing the river than interpreting the traces left behind within it. Environmental DNA, usually shortened to eDNA, has become the first major conceptual shift in deep Amazon research for decades. Every organism moving through the basin continuously releases fragments of genetic material into the surrounding water. Skin cells drift away from fish scales, mucus disperses into current, waste products, reproductive material, and microscopic particles from decomposition all contribute to an invisible molecular cloud suspended within the river itself. This genetic material does not persist indefinitely. Ultraviolet radiation, microbial activity, temperature, and chemical processes gradually break it apart over periods ranging from hours to several days. Yet, before degradation occurs, water samples can preserve enough intact sequence information to reveal which organisms recently occupied a given section of river. Researchers now collect deep water samples using sterile filtration systems lowered into major channel habitats. Back in laboratories, those filters undergo genetic analysis capable of detecting dozens or even hundreds of species simultaneously. The method requires no visual encounter, no captured specimen, and no direct contact with the animal being identified. A single container of river water becomes a temporary biological inventory of everything that passed nearby within the previous 48 hours. Between 2018 and 2023, eDNA surveys conducted in the Amazon produced particularly intriguing results from deep channel environments. Several recovered genetic sequences failed to match any species currently recorded in global databases. The unknown sequences likely represent undescribed organisms inhabiting regions of the river still inaccessible to conventional observation. In some cases, researchers cannot even determine whether the unidentified DNA belongs to fish, amphibians, or entirely different aquatic groups because no comparable reference exists. At the same time, technologies originally developed outside biology are beginning to enter Amazon research in unexpected ways. Distributed fiber optic sensing, designed initially for seismic and industrial monitoring, can detect tiny pressure disturbances traveling through long cables. When deployed near water, these systems may eventually allow scientists to monitor the movement of large animals indirectly by registering vibrations generated as bodies displace current around them. Experimental underwater gliders are also being redesigned for river conditions. Existing autonomous vehicles function effectively in relatively clear, low-current marine environments, but the Amazon demands entirely different engineering priorities. Future prototypes aim to navigate without visual input while tolerating abrasive sediment and unstable current structures. Field testing for the earliest Amazon adapted systems is expected sometime within the coming decade. Yet these new methods are altering not only how the river is studied, but the nature of scientific understanding itself. The Amazon's deep world may never become visually familiar in the way coral reefs or deep-sea trenches have through photography. Instead, knowledge may emerge through patterns in sequence data, acoustic signatures, pressure fluctuations, and indirect traces carried through water. The river still withholds its image. What changes now is humanity's willingness to listen to forms of evidence that do not depend upon sight. Far beyond the final bend of the river, where fresh water loses its name against the horizon, the Amazon continues moving through the Atlantic in forms that are difficult to see from the surface. The river does not simply empty into the ocean and disappear. It spreads outward as chemistry, temperature, nutrients, and motion, extending its influence across a vast section of the western Atlantic long after the visible channel has vanished behind it. At the mouth, billions of tons of fresh water pour into salt water every day, forming a buoyant surface layer that floats above the denser ocean beneath. Driven northeastward by prevailing currents and trade winds, this plume stretches hundreds of kilometers along the South American coastline. Satellites detect it as a shifting field of altered color and temperature, a moving extension of the continent itself drifting into open sea. The fresh water changes the physical behavior of the Atlantic surface. Salt water evaporates more readily than fresh water, transferring heat and moisture into the atmosphere above. Where the Amazon plume spreads across the ocean, evaporation rates decline slightly, cooling the exchange between sea and sky. Meteorologists studying tropical storm systems have observed that hurricanes crossing these low salinity waters often weaken as they pass through the plume zone. The river alters atmospheric energy not through violence, but through subtle adjustments in heat and moisture unfolding over enormous distances. Within this drifting freshwater layer travels another cargo carried from deep within the basin. Every year, the Amazon delivers an estimated 28 million tons of phosphorus and nitrogen into the Atlantic. These nutrients originate partly in Andean rock weathered by rainfall, partly in forest soils, and partly in the slow decomposition of organic matter transported downstream from flooded forests and tributaries. Once released into coastal ocean water, these nutrients fertilize immense phytoplankton blooms visible from orbit as turquoise and green swirls spreading through the Atlantic. Though microscopic, phytoplankton collectively influence planetary systems at remarkable scale. Through photosynthesis, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, incorporating it into living tissue before much of it eventually sinks into deeper ocean layers. In this way, the Amazon contributes indirectly to one of Earth's largest carbon sequestration processes. Even beneath the ocean floor, the river's influence persists. The Hamza system, moving slowly through porous sedimentary rock far below the visible river, eventually releases fresh water into the Atlantic through diffuse seepage across broad offshore regions. Unlike the dramatic discharge at the surface mouth, this underground flow emerges gradually through marine sediments, altering local salinity and temperature patterns over geological time. Oceanographers puzzled for decades over certain chemical anomalies near the Amazon margin before subsurface freshwater movement offered a plausible explanation. The result is not a boundary between river and ocean, but a continuum extending from Andean rainfall to Atlantic circulation. Sediment from mountain erosion feeds marine ecosystems thousands of kilometers away. Forest nutrients nourish microscopic ocean life invisible to passing ships. Freshwater modifies atmospheric behavior above tropical seas. Deep underground flow reshapes chemistry beneath the continental shelf. The Amazon's unmapped channel remains threaded through all of it, hidden beneath opaque water while influencing systems far beyond the forest. What appears on maps as a river is, in practice, part of a planetary exchange operating across land, sea, rock, and atmosphere together. By the early 21st century, scientists studying the Amazon had reached an unusual point in the history of exploration. Instead of cataloging discoveries, many research papers began cataloging absences. Entire sections of formal studies were devoted not to answers, but to unresolved variables, missing observations, and processes that could only be inferred indirectly through fragments of data gathered at the surface of a river whose interior remained inaccessible. In laboratories and research institutes across Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and the United States, Hydrologists, ecologists, and fisheries biologists gradually assembled a structured inventory of uncertainty. The unknowns were no longer vague mysteries at the edge of science. They became measurable gaps, carefully defined problems waiting for technologies that did not yet exist. Even the total number of fish species inhabiting the Amazon deep channel remains uncertain within a margin of several hundred animals. This uncertainty persists despite more than a century of biological surveys. The difficulty lies not in identifying captured species, but in reaching habitats below the accessible layer of the river. Nets collapse in powerful currents. Cameras lose visibility within seconds. Acoustic signals scatter through suspended sediment before resolving into usable images. Beneath the upper water column, the river withdraws from direct examination. The relationship between the visible Amazon and the buried Hamza system remains equally unresolved. Geologists know both systems move generally west to east beneath the basin, yet whether they exchange water directly through fractures or porous sediments remains uncertain. No instrument network exists deep enough or extensive enough to observe such interactions continuously across thousands of kilometers of underground rock. The deeper hydrology of the basin survives mostly as inference assembled from pressure data, thermal anomalies, and chemical signatures detected far apart from one another. Several migratory catfish species continue to vanish into unexplored sections of the river during critical phases of their life cycle. Researchers tracking Goliath catfish through acoustic transmitters observe long migrations upriver, followed by sudden disappearance into deep channels where monitoring coverage ends. Months later, the fish reappear hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. Proposed spawning grounds near Andean tributaries remain hypotheses supported by timing, larval distribution, and migratory behavior rather than direct observation. The chemistry of the deep channel is similarly incomplete. Scientists suspect that permanent hypoxic zones may exist below 30 meters in some blackwater sections, regions where dissolved oxygen remains near zero throughout the year. Comparable environments occur in stratified lakes and coastal dead zones elsewhere on Earth, yet no continuous oxygen monitoring system has ever operated long-term in the Amazon's deeper main channel. Instruments capable of surviving pressure, sediment abrasion, biological fouling, and relentless current remain prohibitively difficult to maintain. Meanwhile, hydrophones lowered into isolated sections of deep water continue recording sounds that resist explanation. Some resemble low-frequency communication pulses associated with large catfish. Others arrive as rhythmic clicks or layered vibrations unlike any cataloged species. Many recordings remain archived without follow-up investigation, not because they lack scientific value, but because there are too few specialists, too little funding, and too vast a river to pursue every anomaly hidden within it. And so, the most accurate scientific answer to what exists at the bottom of the Amazon is unusually simple. It is not a completed inventory, nor a solved ecosystem waiting inside textbooks. It is an acknowledgement that one of Earth's largest rivers still contains environments beyond direct human knowledge, and that understanding them may require generations yet to come. A river can be crossed in minutes and still remain beyond understanding for centuries. That contradiction settles quietly over the Amazon after enough years of study. Boats move across its surface every day. Satellites pass overhead in regular orbit. Research stations stand along tributaries from Peru to Brazil. Yet beneath the visible waterline, the basin continues to exceed the reach of the tools designed to measure it. The difficulty has never belonged to one obstacle alone. Depth by itself can be engineered around. Darkness can be answered with sonar. Current can be resisted with stronger hulls and motors. Sediment can sometimes be filtered from data. But in the Amazon, every difficulty exists simultaneously, layered together across 6,400 kilometers of moving water. The river changes shape while it is being measured. It absorbs instruments into turbulence and mud. It widens into floodplain lakes, narrows into bottlenecks, rearranges its floor, then carries the evidence away downstream. Each technical advance has revealed another boundary beneath it. Sonar reached farther into the channel only to encounter acoustic turbidity. Satellite monitoring mapped flood cycles while leaving the riverbed unseen. Genetic sampling identified unseen organisms without revealing their behavior or habitat. Hydrophones recorded unknown sounds that no camera could follow. The closer science approaches the deep Amazon, the more the river divides into additional layers of unanswered questions. Professional scientific study of the basin has continued in some form since the 18th century. Naturalists, geologists, hydrologists, fisheries biologists, chemists, and climatologists have all added fragments to the larger picture. Yet the ratio between what is known and what remains uncertain has shifted surprisingly little during the last half century. New discoveries emerge constantly, but so do new unknowns attached to them, expanding the perimeter of uncertainty as quickly as knowledge accumulates. Most natural systems eventually become clearer through sustained observation. Mountain ranges can be surveyed. Atmospheric systems can be modeled. Even the deep ocean floor, hidden beneath 11 kilometers of pressure and darkness, has gradually yielded to autonomous submersibles and global mapping programs. In some respects, humanity now possesses more coherent maps of abyssal plains in the Pacific than of the bottom of a river accessible by motorboat from populated cities. There is a quiet inversion inside that fact. The places once imagined as most unreachable, polar ice sheets, deep trenches, distant planets, have increasingly submitted to engineering and computation. Meanwhile, the Amazon, flowing through regions with airports, universities, fiber optic cables, and centuries of recorded exploration, remains partly inaccessible not because it lies far away, but because its complexity exceeds the simplifying assumptions built into human technology. The river resists containment through constant motion. It refuses stable boundaries. Its chemistry shifts between tributaries and depths. Organisms migrate through darkness faster than surveys can follow. Sediment rewrites the channel floor continuously. Flood seasons dissolve distinctions between river and forest until the basin behaves less like a conventional waterway and more like a continental circulation system temporarily wearing the shape of a river. And so, the Amazon remains difficult, not because it conceals itself deliberately, but because it operates at a scale where movement, biology, geology, chemistry, and climate all overlap at once. The challenge is not discovering a hidden chamber or a final unmapped trench. The challenge is that the entire system is alive with change beyond the capacity of any single instrument, expedition, or generation to fully contain. Before forests spread across Europe, before grasslands opened in Africa, before the first human ancestor shaped stone with deliberate hands, the Amazon was already moving eastward across South America. For approximately 10 million years, the basin has existed in something close to its present arrangement, carrying sediment from the Andes toward the Atlantic through channels that shifted, widened, vanished, and returned again across geological time. During those millions of years, the planet itself changed repeatedly around it. Ice ages expanded and retreated across the northern hemisphere. Sea levels rose and fell by more than 100 meters. Entire ecosystems appeared, flourished, and disappeared. Species emerged from isolation, adapted to new climates, and vanished into extinction. Yet the river continued through each transformation, uninterrupted by whether any creature understood the mechanics of its flow. Long before scientific instruments lowered hydrophones into dark water, fish in the deep channel were already navigating through pressure gradients and electric fields. Long before satellites traced flood pulses from orbit, dolphins were threading silently through submerged forests during seasonal inundations. Catfish began their migrations upriver thousands of generations before maps existed to describe the routes they followed. The deep channel did not wait for observation in order to become complex. It became complex because time, evolution, geology, and water interacted continuously without pause. Darkness shaped sensory systems. Turbidity selected for electrolocation and echolocation. Seasonal floods, reorganized breeding cycles, and migration patterns over spans of time difficult for human memory to fully comprehend. The river evolved living systems suited precisely to conditions humans still struggle to examine directly. There is no evidence anywhere within the basin that the Amazon requires comprehension in order to function. Nutrients continue circulating whether they are sampled or not. The Hamza system continues its movement through buried sedimentary rock, regardless of whether thermal anomalies are measured above it. Undescribed fish species continue reproducing in habitats no person has seen. The river remains operational at every scale, independent of human awareness. Many indigenous cultures of the basin approach this reality differently from modern scientific institutions. Across thousands of years, the river was treated less as an object to decode than as a presence woven into daily existence. Knowledge developed through continuity, repetition, memory, and coexistence. Seasonal changes were learned through participation rather than conquest. The river was not reduced to a problem awaiting final solution because its complexity was accepted as part of the landscape itself. Modern science often approached the Amazon from another direction, assuming that sustained inquiry would eventually produce comprehensive understanding. In many environments, that assumption proved successful. Forest canopies were measured, genomes were sequenced, planetary atmospheres were modeled, yet the deep Amazon repeatedly resisted simplification. Each layer of explanation opened into another layer of motion, uncertainty, or hidden interaction beyond the reach of current observation. And still the river continues with complete indifference to whether its interior is ever fully mapped. The undescribed species move through dark water tonight, exactly as their ancestors did, long before human arrival in the basin. Electric fish exchange pulses through black water channels. Catfish continue migrations spanning thousands of kilometers beneath opaque currents. Beneath the continent, the Hamza continues its near motionless seepage toward the Atlantic through ancient rock. The Amazon does not depend on discovery in order to remain complete. It existed before human understanding, and much of it may continue beyond it, carrying life through darkness, with or without witnesses. In the 21st century, humanity slowly adopted the belief that Earth had become entirely visible. Satellites crossed overhead every hour. Remote sensing mapped deserts, glaciers, forests, and coastlines with astonishing precision. Radar systems penetrated clouds that once concealed entire landscapes for months at a time. Autonomous vehicles descended into the deepest parts of the ocean and returned carrying measurements, photographs, and samples from places no human diver could survive. Scientific culture began speaking about the planet as though the age of discovery had quietly ended. Yet the Amazon continued flowing beneath that confidence, carrying inside itself a world that no person has directly seen. The deep channel of the river remains one of the strangest contradictions in modern science. It is not hidden beneath Antarctic ice or isolated within some distant abyssal trench. Boats travel across it every day. Towns and research stations stand along its banks. Scientists have studied the basin continuously for centuries. Still, beneath the opaque current, entire environments remain outside direct human observation. Environmental DNA can reveal which species passed through the darkness hours earlier. Hydrophones can record pulses, clicks, migrations, and biological sounds emerging from water too turbid for cameras or divers. Sediment cores can preserve traces of vanished climates buried within ancient layers of mud. Each technique adds another fragment to the outline of the unseen river below. Fragments, however, are not the same as presence. No recording can fully describe what it means to exist 70 meters beneath the Amazon surface, while pressure, current, and suspended sediment erase all light. No genetic sequence can recreate the sensory world of animals navigating through darkness using electricity, vibration, or pressure alone. Science can confirm movement, chemistry, and life without ever delivering direct experience of the place itself. There is a real possibility that the deepest habitats of the Amazon may never become visually accessible to humanity. The obstacle is not depth alone, the obstacle is accumulation. Pressure combines with violent current. Sediment combines with acoustic distortion. Seasonal flooding reshapes the river faster than stable mapping can occur. Every technical solution encounters another layer of instability beneath it. Science possesses careful language for uncertainty, probability, and inference, yet it has fewer words for places that remain permanently beyond sight despite centuries of effort. The Amazon exists within that category. It shapes rainfall, biodiversity, ocean chemistry, and planetary climate while preserving hidden interiors that no expedition has successfully entered. Perhaps this is the more honest definition of a frontier. Not a blank territory waiting for conquest, but a living system whose scale exceeds the instruments designed to measure it. The river is approximately 6,400 kilometers long and close to 10 million years old. It carries more fresh water than any river on Earth. Its bottom has never been clearly seen by human eyes. It may never be seen. And beneath the shifting brown surface, life continues moving through darkness to night, exactly as it did long before the first map, the first satellite, or the first scientific expedition ever arrived beside the water. Catfish still follow pressure trails through submerged valleys. Dolphins still rise for air before descending again. Electric fish still exchange signals through channels. River does not pause, and it does not need witnesses to exist there.